All right, strap yourselves in, because today we are going deep, deep, deep into the story of the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
Ooh, one of the most iconic clubs in rugby league history.
That's right, you brought an absolute mountain of articles all about their early years.
And how they basically dominated Australian Rugby League.
And you know what? Even if you aren't a huge sports fan, stick with us.
There's so much more to the Rabbitohs than just wins and losses.
Their story is intertwined with Australian culture.
Absolutely.
So let's rewind the clock way back to the early 1900s.
Back when rugby league was just starting to find its feet here in Australia.
Just how dominant were these Rabbitohs?
Oh, they were dominant right from the start.
Like right off the bat.
Right off the bat, we're talking 1908, the year the New South Wales Rugby Football League was born.
The NSWRFL.
Exactly. And the Rabbitohs were one of the founding clubs.
They were there from day one.
And guess what? They won the very first premiership.
Wow, talk about making a statement.
They set the standard for everything that was to come.
But what was the secret to their early success?
Well, it was a combination of factors.
I bet.
A real perfect storm, so to speak.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, first, they had a geographical advantage.
A geographical advantage.
Think about it. Redfern and the surrounding inner Sydney suburbs back then were tough.
Working class areas.
Exactly. And rugby league was the sport of the people.
It was a working man's game.
Those neighborhoods were overflowing with natural rugby league talent.
So the Rabbitohs had a built-in talent pool.
They were a magnet for these tough, skilled players who grew up playing in the streets.
So location, location, location.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing there's more to the story than just having a bunch of talented players.
Oh, absolutely.
So what else was in the mix?
Well, the Rabbitohs weren't just tough, they were smart.
Oh.
They were early adopters of a more structured, attacking style of rugby league,
Interesting.
which was a big contrast to the slower, more traditional game that was popular back then.
So they were innovators.
They brought finesse to a brawler's game, you could say.
And it sounds like it completely revolutionized the sport.
It definitely influenced how rugby league evolved.
Okay, so they were strategic pioneers.
And they weren't afraid to use their physicality to their advantage.
Of course, rugby league's a tough sport.
Oh, they were known for their aggressive defense and their bone-jarring tackles.
I bet.
Opponents knew that facing the Rabbitohs meant facing a physical onslaught.
So they had that mental edge.
Exactly. It definitely played a part in their dominance.
So we've got local talent, tactical innovation, and that tough Rabbitohs grit.
All essential ingredients for success.
Was there anything else missing from this recipe for domination?
Well, I'd say the final and possibly most important ingredient was their winning culture.
That winning mentality.
From day one, they established this belief that they were destined for greatness.
And they had the results to back it up.
And, success breeds success.
The more they won, the more they expected to win.
It became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So it wasn't just about individual skill.
It was a collective mindset, a hunger for victory that set them apart.
I love it. But let's talk about some specific moments.
Let's dive into some of those key moments that cemented their status as a dynasty in the making.
Let's do it.
Well, we've already talked about their historic 1908 premiership win against Eastern Suburbs.
Who are now known as the Sydney Roosters.
Right, and that victory was the spark that ignited one of rugby league's fiercest rivalries.
The Rabbitohs versus the Roosters.
A clash of the titans that continues to this day.
I bet those games were absolutely electric.
Oh, you can't even imagine the intensity.
But tell me more about those early years.
Well, the following year, in 1909, something truly bizarre happened.
Okay, this I got here.
Picture this. It's the grand final.
About the biggest game of the year.
The Rabbitohs are set to play Balmain.
Got it.
But Balmain, protesting a perceived bias towards South Sydney by the league, they boycotted the match.
They boycotted the grand final.
They refused to play. So the Rabbitohs, they walk onto the field unopposed, kick off to an empty field, and are declared premiers by default.
Wait a minute. They won a championship without even playing a game.
It's one of the strangest stories in Australian sporting history.
That is wild. Talk about a lucky break.
You could say that.
But I guess you make your own luck sometimes.
And their dominance didn't end there.
Of course not. We're just getting started.
Throughout the 1910s, they continued to rack up premierships.
Really piling on the wins.
They secured 4 titles in that decade alone.
It was clear they were here to stay.
They were a force to be reckoned with.
So they'd already cemented their spot at the top. But it sounds like things went into overdrive in the 1920s.
That's when the Rabbitohs truly entered their golden age.
The dynasty years?
Between 1925 and 1929, they won 5 consecutive premierships.
5 in a row. That's
Yeah.
mind-blowing. What made this era so special?
Well, if we're talking standout years, 1925 has to be it.
What happened in 1925?
That year, the Rabbitohs achieved the unthinkable.
Okay, tell me more.
They went the entire season undefeated.
Not a single loss.
Not one. They were so far ahead of the competition that a grand final wasn't even needed.
They were crowned premiers automatically.
Automatically, a testament to their incredible skill and strategic brilliance.
Wow. To be so good that you don't even have to play the final game.
It's almost unheard of.
Right, you sold me.
They were a truly remarkable team.
So I'm dying to know, who were some of the key players who made this dynasty possible?
Now we're talking legends, and
Right.
the 1925 team was stacked with them.
But were there any standout names? Anyone who really made their mark?
A few names immediately come to mind.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with them.
First, there's Howard Hallett.
Howard Hallett.
He was known as the Prince of Fullbacks.
The Prince of Fullbacks. I love it.
He was renowned for his defensive skill.
So he's the wall at the back.
Exactly. He captained the team to multiple premierships, and his legacy is undisputed.
So the Prince was holding down the fort on defense.
And then there was Alf Smacker Blair.
Smacker Blair. I like the sound of this guy already.
He was another captain who led the team through those dominant years.
So another inspirational leader.
Absolutely. Smacker wasn't just tough.
There's more.
He was also a brilliant tactician, one of the greatest captains in South Sydney's history.
Smacker Blair, a legend in the making.
And we can't forget about Benny Waring.
Benny Waring. All right. Tell me about him.
This guy was a try-scoring machine.
A try-scoring machine, huh?
He holds the record for South Sydney's all-time leading try scorer, a staggering 144 tries.
144 tries. Are you serious?
And that record stood for decades.
He must have been something special.
He was one of the first true superstars of rugby league. His speed and agility were unmatched.
So we've got the Prince on defense, Smacker leading the charge, and Benny Waring racking up the points.
It was a team for the ages.
They sound incredible, but I'm curious. It's one thing to win games,
Right.
but what kind of impact did all this success have on the club, the community, the sport as a whole?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
The Rabbitohs' success went way beyond the field.
It had a ripple effect.
Absolutely. It had a profound impact on their community and on the sport itself.
So they were more than just a team, they were a symbol.
They were a symbol of their community, of their values, and their identity.
Like a reflection of the community itself.
Exactly. Those tough, hard-working players from Redfern, they weren't just athletes.
They were heroes.
They embodied the spirit of their community, their grit, and their resilience.
And their success became a shared victory.
A celebration of working-class strength and a testament to the power of community.
It's amazing how sport can do that.
It brings people together.
It gives them something to believe in.
And the Rabbitohs were the perfect example of that.
But their influence extended beyond their local community, right?
Absolutely.
In what way?
At the time, rugby union was the dominant code in Australia.
Really?
But the Rabbitohs, with their exciting brand of football and their string of victories, they started to change that.
They started to tip the scales.
They drew more and more people to rugby league, helping to establish it as a major force in Australian sports.
So they were pioneers, not just for the Rabbitohs.
But for rugby league itself,
No easy.
and their dominance only intensified their already heated rivalry with eastern suburbs.
Those games must have been something else.
They were legendary for their intensity and passion.
I can only imagine.
The Rabbitohs versus the Roosters, it was a rivalry that captivated the entire city.
It's fascinating how sport can become so much more than just a game.
It's about history, community, and identity.
But even dynasties don't last forever.
Unfortunately not.
What eventually led to the end of this incredible run for the Rabbitohs?
Well, as with all things, change is inevitable.
What changed?
Well, for one, the competition started to catch up.
Other teams stepped up their game.
Clubs like Balmain and St. George, they emerged as serious contenders.
So the playing field leveled out.
And holding on to that top spot became much tougher,
It's hard to stay on top forever.
especially in a sport as competitive as rugby league.
So what other factors contributed to this change in fortune for the Rabbitohs?
Well, as the saying goes, Father Time is undefeated.
The stars of the 1920s started to retire.
They did. And as those veteran players hung up their boots, the team lost some of its leadership and experience.
It's hard to replace that kind of experience.
And then there were the financial realities.
Money always plays a part.
The clubs relied heavily on local support.
And I'm guessing as resources tightened, it became harder to attract and retain top talent.
Exactly. It's a common challenge for clubs in any sport.
It makes sense. It's hard to maintain that level of dominance when you're facing challenges both on and off the field.
It's like a constant battle.
So was this the end of the Rabbitohs as a force to be reckoned with in rugby league?
Well, let's just say the Rabbitohs are a team that knows how to adapt and overcome.
I have a feeling their story is far from over.
Oh, you haven't heard the half of it.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
We've only just scratched the surface of the Rabbitohs' incredible journey.
All right, you've got me hooked. So the Rabbitohs hit a bit of a rough patch, huh?
Yeah, but you know what? They're nothing if not resilient.
Okay.
The Rabbitohs, they always find a way to bounce back.
So this isn't the end of their story.
Oh, not even close. In fact, you could say they were about to enter a new chapter.
A new chapter, huh? I like it. So what happened next?
Well, they went through a bit of a transformation.
A transformation?
Just think of it like this. They shed their old skin and embraced new challenges.
Okay, I'm listening.
And they came out stronger than ever.
All right, I'm intrigued. Walk me through this transformation.
Well, it wasn't an overnight process.
I bet.
It took time, dedication, a renewed focus
On what?
on the fundamentals of the game.
Back to basics.
You could say that.
So what did this back to basics approach look like?
Well, they concentrated on developing young talent.
Building for the future.
They also really focused on fostering a strong team culture.
Okay, so they were looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. And they had to be smart about managing their finances, too.
Of course, money matters.
It always does.
So they were laying the groundwork for a comeback.
A comeback that would see them back on top of the rugby league world.
When did this revival really take hold?
The 1950s.
The 1950s, okay.
That decade marked the dawn of a new era for South Sydney.
So they came roaring back.
They won premierships in 1950, 1951, 1954, and 1955.
4 premierships in 1 decade.
They were back with a vengeance.
Talk about a comeback. So who are the key players during this time?
Well, the 1950s saw the emergence of some truly iconic players.
Give me some names.
First and foremost, you have Jack Rayner,
Jack Rayner, all right.
a brilliant fullback who captained the team to 3 of those 4 premierships.
He must have been something special.
Oh, he was known for his speed, his elusiveness, his incredible game sense.
It sounds like he was the complete package.
A true leader on and off the field.
So Jack Rayner was leading the charge.
And then there's Clive Churchill.
Clive Churchill, that name rings a bell.
Many consider him one of the greatest rugby league players of all time.
Wow, what made him so great?
He was so versatile,
Could play anywhere on the field.
but he was especially known for his attacking brilliance.
So he was the one to watch.
Oh, he was a game changer, a true superstar.
It seems like the Rabbitohs have always had a knack for attracting these larger-than-life figures.
It's true, there's something about the Rabbitohs that draws these exceptional talents to the club.
But it's not just about individual brilliance, right?
No, it's about how those individuals come together as a team.
That team spirit.
That's what makes the Rabbitohs so special. It's the perfect blend of individual talent and collective synergy.
So was this 1950s resurgence a fleeting moment, or did their success continue?
Oh, the Rabbitohs weren't done yet.
They were just getting warmed up.
The 1960s saw them reach even greater heights.
Really?
Yeah.
Even better than the 50s.
They added another 4 premierships to their trophy cabinet.
So 8 premierships in 2 decades.
It was a golden era for the club.
What was the secret to their success in the 60s?
Well, they had another incredible generation of players.
Okay, I need names.
Ron Coote, a tough-as-nails lock forward, the heart and soul of the team.
So he was the enforcer.
You could say that he led from the front and inspired his teammates with his uncompromising style of play.
Who else was there?
Bob McCarthy, a versatile player who could seamlessly transition between the forwards and the backs.
So he was a bit of a wild card.
He was a real game changer.
I can see why.
And then there's Eric Sims,
Eric Sims, all right.
one of the most accurate goal kickers the game has ever seen.
So he was racking up the points.
Consistently a real master of his craft.
Sounds like they had all their bases covered.
And of course, we can't forget about John Sadler,
John Sadler.
the captain who led the team to back-to-back premierships in 1967 and 1968.
So he was the leader, the driving force.
A true legend of the club.
With all these amazing players and all these wins, was there a particular game or moment that really stands out from this era?
Well, if we're talking about iconic moments, you can't go past the 1967 Grand Final.
The 1967 Grand Final, what happened?
It was the Rabbitohs against their arch rivals, the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs.
A Grand Final against the Bulldogs.
The tension was palpable.
I bet. So what made this game so special?
Well, it was a brutal encounter.
A real clash of the Titans?
And early in the match, John Sattler, the Rabbitohs captain, he suffered a horrific injury.
Oh no, what happened to him?
He broke his jaw.
He broke his jaw in the grand final.
Not just a little crack either, a full-blown break.
Ouch, that sounds excruciating.
Most people thought his game was over.
I mean, who could blame him?
But John Sattler, he was made of something else.
What do you mean?
He refused to leave the field.
He played on with a broken jaw.
He did. He could barely speak. He was clearly in agony, but he wouldn't give up.
That is incredible. Talk about courage.
It was an inspiring moment, a true testament to his leadership and his determination.
So what happened? Did the Rabbitohs win?
They did. They held on to beat the Bulldogs 12-10.
Wow, what a story.
It's a game that will never be forgotten, a victory forged in pain, resilience, and an unbreakable spirit.
John Sattler playing through a broken jaw to lead his team to victory.
It's the stuff of legends.
This whole deep dive has been incredible.
It really has.
We've seen it all, from early dominance to setbacks to triumphant comebacks and moments of sheer inspiration.
It's what makes the Rabbitohs such a fascinating club.
But after such a successful period in the 50s and 60s, what happened next?
Well, the 1970s and 80s brought a new set of challenges.
Challenges? What kind of challenges?
It was a time of transition, you could say.
Okay, so even the mighty Rabbitohs weren't immune to ups and downs.
No team is.
What kind of obstacles did they face during this time?
Well, the rugby league landscape was changing.
In what way?
New teams were emerging. The game itself was becoming more strategic.
So it was getting tougher to stay on top.
Much tougher.
Makes sense.
Those long stretches of dominance like they had in the early years, they became almost impossible to maintain.
The competition was catching up.
Exactly.
So the Rabbitohs weren't the only big dogs in the yard anymore.
Nope, they had to fight for every win.
But it wasn't just external factors.
No, there were some internal changes too.
Within the club.
Yeah, coaching changes, player turnover.
There's a bit of instability.
And of course, financial constraints always played a role.
Money's always a factor.
It's the lifeblood of any club.
So they were juggling a lot.
They were, but even with all those challenges.
He still had those moments of brilliance.
Oh, absolutely. The Rabbitohs never gave up.
So they were still a team to be reckoned with.
They reached the grand final in 1971.
So they were still contenders.
Always.
Were there any standout players from this era? Anyone who kept that Rabbitohs spirit alive?
Oh, definitely. You had guys like Craig Young,
Craig Young.
a tough and skillful lock forward.
A real workhorse.
And then there's George Piggins.
George Piggins. Now there's a name I've heard before.
He was a legendary hooker, known for his tenacity and his never-say-die attitude.
He sounds like a true Rabbitoh.
He was. He became a symbol of the club's fighting spirit.
I've heard that he played a big role in the club's survival.
Not just on the field, but off the field as well.
In what way?
He was instrumental in helping the Rabbitohs overcome some major challenges.
Sounds like he was a true leader.
He was, but we'll get to that part of the story in a bit.
Okay, you got me hooked.
But for now, let's stick with the 70s and 80s.
A period of transition for the Rabbitohs.
A bit of a roller coaster ride, you could say.
Did they ever manage to recapture that consistent dominance they had in the early days?
Well, the road back to the top wasn't easy.
No, I bet.
The late 80s and 90s were a tumultuous time for the club.
What happened?
They faced a lot of challenges.
Like what?
Financial difficulties, attracting and retaining top talent was a constant struggle.
That's never easy.
And then in 1999, they went through a controversial merger with the St. George Dragons.
A merger? Wow, that's a big deal.
It was a pretty drastic move.
What led to that decision?
Well, Rugby League was going through a lot of changes back then.
We can imagine.
The Super League war had just ended.
It was a turbulent time for the sport.
And a lot of clubs were struggling to adapt.
Including the Rabbitohs.
The merger with St. George was seen as a way to pool resources, create a more stable entity.
So it was a strategic move.
A way to try and ensure the survival of both clubs.
It makes sense in a way.
But it was a very controversial decision.
I bet.
A lot of fans were upset.
They didn't want to see their clubs merge.
That's understandable.
So how did this merger work out?
Unfortunately, it didn't last very long.
Really?
It only lasted 2 seasons.
That's a short time.
It just didn't work out the way they hoped.
What went wrong?
The team struggled on the field, and there were ongoing tensions between the two
A
clubs.
clash of cultures.
You could say that.
So they went their separate ways.
They did. The merger was dissolved in 2001.
So the Rabbitohs were back on their own.
But they were in a very precarious position.
Must have been a tough time for the fans.
It was.
To see their beloved club go through so much upheaval.
But even in those dark times, the spirit of the Rabbitohs never died.
There was always hope.
There were always those who believed in the club.
The die-hard fans.
And their loyalty would play a crucial role in what happened next.
Okay, now you've really got me intrigued. What happened next?
Well, after the merger ended, the Rabbitohs were reinstated into the NRL competition.
In 2002.
But they had a long road ahead of them.
They had to rebuild.
From the ground up.
But they had something that money can't buy.
The support of their community.
The fans never gave up on them.
Never. They were there every step of the way.
So how did they manage to turn things around?
Well, it was a combination of factors.
Like what?
They focused on developing young talent. They made some smart signings.
And building the roster.
And they instilled a new culture of hard work and dedication.
A winning culture.
Exactly.
So they slowly started to climb back up the ladder.
Step by step.
And eventually, they reached the top again.
In 2014.
2014, that's a long time coming.
It had been 43 years since their last premiership.
A whole generation of fans had never seen their team win it all.
But in 2014, the drought was finally broken.
Tell me about it.
They faced the Bulldogs in the grand final.
The Bulldogs again.
It was a tense match, but the Rabbitohs were too good.
They won.
They did. They defeated the Bulldogs 30-6 to claim their 21st premiership.
I bet the celebrations were wild.
It was an incredible moment for the club, for the players, and for the fans.
A true fairy tale ending.
It was a testament to their resilience, their never-say-die attitude, and the unwavering support of their community.
What a journey.
It really is a remarkable story.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We've seen the highs and lows of the Rabbitohs' incredible history.
From those early days of dominance to the challenges of the modern era.
Through mergers, demergers, and everything in between.
But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
The South Sydney Rabbitohs are more than just a football team.
They're an institution.
A symbol of community, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Beautifully said.
Well, there you have it, folks. The story of the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
A story that continues to be written.
A story that shows us that anything is possible if you have the courage to fight for what you believe in.
And never give up on your dreams.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.